Something I've seen countless times throughout my career is when talented departments within the same company silo themselves off from each other. I mean, I get the desire. It's comforting to surround yourself with people you agree with, right? We all do it. But here's what happens. Before you know it, these departments become kingdoms and their leaders become territorial monarchs. And suddenly, collaboration isn't just difficult, it becomes threatening. They start treating their colleagues as bigger competition than their actual competitors. Ideas are dismissed. Not because they lack merit, but because they originated from the other side. The toxic force created by these silos is fear. And let me tell you, it's one of the biggest enemies of your company's success. Hey everyone, I'm Terrace Wayner, and welcome to A Case Study in Corporate Fear, where I do the forensics on the biggest business fails, all in an effort to better understand how and why fear transforms brave leaders of thriving companies into spineless failures of corporate catastrophes. All so you never do. Now, we all know the names of failures like Blockbuster, Tower Records, and Toys R Us, but what most people don't know is the story behind their collapse and how the true mastermind pulling the strings behind the scenes was fear. Okay, let's get into today's case study. It's on the Sony Walkman and how the Sony Corporation led an internal civil war between incredibly talented but siloed divisions caused them to lose their monopoly on the music player category. And in the process, helped to propel Apple into becoming the most valuable company in the world. But before we unpack the fall, let me take you back to when Sony dominated our lives. And to really understand their impact on the world, I need to rewind the cassette tape to 1979. That was the year Sony released their new portable music player called the Walkman. And instantly it was a massive hit. And it only took Sony a few years to sell over 100 million Walkmen worldwide. Sure, there were things like portable cassette players, transistor radios, 8-track tape players, but Sony was the first to really make the concept of personal portable music cool. The Walkman became a cultural phenomenon. It was worn in hit movies like Forrest Gump while Forrest ran across the country, and by the dude in The Big Lebowski. Their bright orange sponge headphones were as omnipresent as Apple's white AirPods are today. And that wasn't all. Sony also played a crucial role in developing compact disc technology. From early research to manufacturing to global promotion, they made the CD the dominant audio format that replaced the cassette tape. So naturally, Sony followed up the success of the Walkman with the release of the Discman, their portable CD player. Get this. During this time, they owned 70% of the CD market, while maintaining over 80% of the portable player market. That's dominance. Even outside of the music category, the entire company had a knack for predicting what people wanted and creating entire product categories. They revolutionized the home video market by making camcorders significantly more portable and user-friendly. Sony called theirs the Handycam. And the brand became so popular that, like the Walkman, it became synonymous with the product category itself. People didn't call their video camera a camcorder. They called everything a Handycam. Their Trinitron line of televisions was the gold standard for decades, and they were innovators of the early flat panel TVs. And their PlayStation gaming console, launched in 1994, quickly became the dominant gaming platform of the decade, outselling competitors like Sega and Nintendo. Sony's ability to shape categories, define the rules of operation, and set the competitive framework led it to be ranked as one of the most valuable and admired brands globally throughout the 1990s. On top of all that, the company was also diversified, expanding into the music sector with the purchase of CBS Records in 1988 and breaking into the movie industry with the acquisition of Columbia Pictures in 1989. Sony was an industry giant with overwhelming power and unstoppable momentum. They produced over 120 million CDs annually, had a massive music catalog to put on them, and had the most popular music players to listen to it all. And they manufactured the most sought-after TVs with a movie studio to create content for the screens. And they had the most popular gaming platform where they could generate game extensions of their films. On top of all that, there was also a growing computer business. Each of these business units was a dominant force in its industry, with each fostering its own unique culture and taking great pride in divisional independence and self sufficiency. But here's where things got tricky. The more independent and self sufficient Sony's divisions became, the more they became siloed off from each other. And you know what? Fear doesn't just love silos, it's where fear thrives. Here's the thing: the more successful individual groups become, and the longer they are kept from interacting with other groups within their organization, colleagues become competitors, rivals, enemies, even competing for management's approval and backing. It doesn't matter how brilliant people are. When they're siloed off from each other, they create an us versus them culture rather than a collaborative one. And when a company faces an external threat, these powerful groups find it incredibly hard to join forces. In Sony's case, this threat came from Apple and the iPod. And rather than coming together to fight Apple, Sony fought amongst themselves. Now, here's the real tragedy of it all. Sony actually had a working prototype for an MP3 digital music player in 1999. That's a full 2 years before the launch of the iPod. For 18 months, 45 of Sony's top engineers had been toiling away on a secret project that produced a portable digital music player with some pretty incredible specs. It was classic Sony, an engineering masterpiece. We're talking a 5 gig hard drive, a 10-hour battery, support for multiple digital music formats, a USB 2.0 plug for quick transfer, and a simple user interface with a color screen. These specs, along with Sony's incredible brand recognition and global distribution, put them in a perfect position to continue their decades-long dominance. But then the battles began, with the first shots fired on February 12, 2000. According to internal accounts, that was the date a critical meeting took place that involved executives from their top business groups like the electronics division, Sony Music, gaming, and digital development. They had come together to see the prototype of the new digital music player that represented the future of Sony's music empire. But instead of celebrating the innovation, the meeting reportedly spiraled into arguments about the damage the new digital music player would have on their existing revenue streams. After the executives were taken through a demonstration along with market projections and a launch timeline, an executive from the Sony Music Group intervened and said, "This will destroy our CD business within 24 months." This sparked an electronics exec to respond, "The market is moving digital and we need to go digital as well." Music replied, "You realize we'll lose $3.4 billion in CD revenue." The divisions argued back and forth about what each would lose if they embraced this amazing technology. And when they couldn't agree, concessions were made and compromises were struck. And by the end of the meeting, the project that represented the future of the Sony Walkman was completely restructured. And not in a good way. They severely limited the storage out of concern people would use the device to hide pirated music. And a triple-layer digital rights management, a DRM, was added to every digital song. This was a really big deal, and we'll cover the impact of this a little later. Then they removed support for the MP3 format, allowing the device only to play a format that Sony controlled called ad track. But wait, there's more. Sony also considered slipping into their terms of service a clause that if someone had digital music in the MP3 format, it would be automatically and permanently changed to the ad track format when played on a Sony device. When the electronics team returned with their revised prototype for the far less impressive digital music player, they pleaded with the music division to include the MP3 format. To which the music group replied, "We will not support the MP3 format. It is non-negotiable." Then music added insult to injury by insisting on charging $1.49 a song instead of the market price of 99 cents, saying, "We must do everything we can to protect our CD margins." All of these compromises delayed the launch of the project by 18 months and added 300 million in extra development costs to the already 150 million spent. I personally believe that in these series of meetings, Sony mapped a course that would forever end its dominance in the music player category. Meanwhile, while Sony battled internally, Steve Jobs took the stage at one of his famous keynotes and introduced the sleek and simple to use iPod. He closed the presentation by unveiling iTunes, calling it a simple way for people to organize their digital music collection. The iPod was developed in less than a year and played all of the popular digital music formats. And in a way only Steve Jobs could do, he described it in one elegant line: iPod puts 1,000 songs in your pocket. Fortune magazine called it the 21st century Walkman. That same year, Sony finally launched their digital music player. They called it the Network Walkman. It was immediately compared to the iPod, earning reviews like, "It's an overall poor customer experience and not compatible with popular music formats like the iPod." But here's where it gets even crazier. While the electronics division struggled to get its version of a digital Walkman to catch on in the market, Sony's computer division was developing a competing digital music player. They called it the Vio Music Clip. It had a sleek, compact design, supported the MP3 format, and many said it felt like an iPod. The Walkman team instantly treated it as a threat, criticizing the device as technically inferior. Then they used their considerable power within Sony to limit the Vio Music Clip's development and marketing. The music division piled on and refused to provide support, as well as prevented integration with their music catalog until they switched from MP3 to the ad track format. The music clip struggled for several years, but without support from the other divisions, it was eventually discontinued. Then in 2003, Apple took another major leap forward by evolving their iTunes platform into a music store. The store allowed people to effortlessly purchase and download music to their current iTunes library. It was simple to use, and customers immediately loved it. And it quickly became the universal tool for purchasing and managing digital music. Sony's answer to iTunes was something they called the Connect Music Store, and it immediately became another Sony battlefield, as well as a product that satisfied no one. Like many Sony innovations, the initial vision was extraordinary. The prototype included one-click music purchases, universal format support, and cross-device compatibility for a global content library. But then fear stepped in. Piracy concerns led to the music for sale in the store being only available in the ad track format, as well as 3 layers of digital rights management, format conversion requirements, device restrictions, and geographic limitations. The outcome was an 8-step purchase process and transfer times that often took 4 to 6 hours. As for digital rights management, or DRM, Sony Music's insistence on a triple-layer DRM put extremely complex restrictions on digital playback and added to the already dreadful user experience. Okay, I've mentioned DRM a few times, so let me take a minute to explain. A DRM is a set of technologies, tools, and processes used to control and protect digital content. It aims to manage how users can access, use, and distribute copyrighted digital media. And while the ultimate goal is to prevent content piracy, a DRM also comes with constraints that often frustrate users. And the 3 layers of encryption that Sony Music was requiring did just that. It reduced audio quality, slowed music transfer and playback, as well as limited the ability to share music between devices. It also didn't allow the owners to back up their music. And a big potential issue was that the music would become unplayable as technologies changed. Many argued that it actually wound up encouraging piracy. As you would imagine, customers hated it, and it drove them further away from Sony's music store and right into the arms of Apple, which offered a more user-friendly experience. Steve Jobs famously said, "People don't want to steal music, but the whole process of downloading music is convoluted and time-consuming. And people steal digital music because there's no viable alternative. And thanks to iTunes, now there is. Then he went on to say this about iTunes. Our iTunes store is the easiest way to buy music in the world. And customers bought a lot of it. By 2004, iPod's market share in digital music players had grown to 50%. And by 2006, just 3 short years after the launch of the iTunes Store, Apple sold their 1 billionth song. Something to remember is that Apple built a music store from scratch. They didn't own a music label or even have a relationship with the music industry. But the one thing they did have was the understanding of how to create a simple and elegant customer experience. Meanwhile, over at the Sony Connect Music Store, they had set the ambitious sales expectations of 1 million downloads in its first week. But they fell drastically short of that goal, selling only 23,000 songs. In the first month, they expected 5 million users, but only 180,000 showed up. The New York Times panned the store, saying they ought to call it the Sony disconnect. The Washington Post said, Sony's music service is an embarrassment to the company that gave the world the Walkman. And in 2007, Sony's Connect Music Store was shut down. A Sony engineer said, we had the technology, the expertise, and the brand. What we didn't have was the courage to disrupt ourselves. And while Sony was busy losing in the digital music space, the Sony Music division was hard at work trying to permanently hurt their precious CD business. They were so obsessed with people pirating their music that they decided to plant a hidden software program on their music CDs to try and stop it. And without the customer knowing, the software secretly installed itself onto the computer's hard drive when the CD was played. And if that wasn't bad enough, the software was also designed so it could never be disabled or removed from their personal computer. Using something called a rootkit technology, it concealed itself deep in the computer's operating system. Its sole purpose was to prevent the copying of music, the very music that their customers had legally purchased. The scandal began on October 31st, 2005, when security researcher Mark Rusinovich discovered that a Sony music CD had surreptitiously installed software on his computer. But Rusinovich was far from the only one. This unauthorized software installation affected over 550,000 networks in more than 100 countries, including thousands of United States military and defense networks. Sony's initial response to the controversy was dismissive, with the president of the music division infamously stating, "Most people don't even know what a rootkit is, so why should they care about it?" As you would imagine, this not only led to a massive consumer backlash, it also led to multiple class action lawsuits. Sony was forced to recall millions of CDs and pay tens of millions in settlements. Meanwhile, over at Apple, Steve Jobs was preaching his 6 key principles of a great user experience. The first principle is, you start with the user experience and work backward to the technology. Think for a minute how Sony's behavior was the exact opposite. Their obsession with protecting their tech completely overshadowed what their customers wanted. And the irony of it all is that by trying to protect their CD business, Sony Music not only lost the digital music revolution, but accelerated the decline of CDs. The intense rivalries and distrust between Sony's various divisions created a culture where each group operated as separate fiefdoms, where division heads had little incentive to cooperate. As this practice continued, this corporate structure profoundly hampered Sony's ability to innovate. Just think about this for a second. In the year 2000, Sony was averaging well over 100 innovation proposals a year. But by 2008, that number dropped to just 17, a staggering 83% drop in creative output. Over the same time frame, the project kill rate grew from 20% to 85%, and the number of days to get a decision from management went from 15 days in 2000 to over 180 days in 2008. On the contrary, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, he initiated a creative transformation that led to over 150 innovation proposals a year. He also centralized decision-making and demanded that his team focus on user experience-centric design. Then he integrated the hardware and software teams and had a willingness to cannibalize existing product lines. The problem with silos is that conflicts tend to repeat themselves over and over again, and that's exactly what happened across Sony. And no group went unscathed. When PlayStation pitched the prototype for its first portable multimedia device called the PSP, it was elegant and true to Sony's innovative history. It had an open media platform with capabilities that supported the MP3 format. But in true fashion, Sony Music quickly stepped in and blocked MP3 playback and music sharing, as well as restricted content transfer and mandated ad track integration. And like the digital Walkman player, it resulted in a compromised product and missed market opportunities. Another example was in the computer division. They had a working prototype for a tablet computer in 2002, years before the iPad. However, fears of cannibalizing laptop sales, concerns from the music division about piracy, and worries from the PlayStation team about gaming impact led to the prototype being killed. 5 years later, Apple would revolutionize the tablet market with the iPad, adding $19 billion to Apple's revenue in the first year. Steve Jobs famously said, "If you don't cannibalize yourself, someone else will." And when he launched the iPhone in 2007, he introduced it as the best iPod ever with a touchscreen. With that one simple sentence, he made the iPod obsolete. A product that, at the time, made up 40% of Apple's revenue and had sold over 400 million units since its launch in 2001. And by fearlessly cannibalizing their own product, Apple was able to transition people from a less expensive iPod to a more expensive iPhone. This catapulted Apple into becoming the most valuable company in the world. Some incredibly smart and innovative people worked at Sony across every division. In fact, I worked directly with many while doing their marketing, and I would never use the word fearful in the traditional sense when describing them. They were bold and confident leaders. But that's the amazing thing about fear. It can mask itself in ways that make it really hard to notice it as it's derailing your company. It can make you feel like the bravest person in the room while you do stupid things. That's why it's crucial to always be on the lookout for fearful behavior and learn how to recognize the warning signs in your organization. To learn how it creates chaos and how it moves and spreads and grows. And especially when fear is making your smartest people silo themselves from each other. Thank you for joining me for this episode of A Case Study in Corporate Fear. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more case studies and to better understand the impact fear can have on your career and your company, visit fear-incorporated.com. You will also find the sources and citations that were used to fact-check this episode.